Good morning, John.
Morning.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
And we have someone is good morning and someone is good evening. 所以大家好，早上好，晚上好，谢谢大家来收听我们2021年春季的 School Talk Fridays。那么今天呢，是我们2021年招生官分享系列的第一季，我们非常的高兴，请到了联合国国际学校 UNIS 的招生主任 Mr. John Nicholas 来跟我们分享。我看到江已经在这儿，因为前几年呢都是我春季的时候，我最喜欢做的事情就是去各个学校，不同的学校去访校。那时候，校园里面都很漂亮，树枝都开始发春芽了，然后花也开了，然后听学校里的老师，然后招生官介绍他们不同的理念，是一个非常非常有意思的事情。今年呢，非常遗憾不能到学校里面去实地的访校，但是更高兴的是，我们借这个机会呢，我们能请到了现任的招生官，能跟我们世界各地的家长朋友们，还有小朋友们分享他们的学校的理念，然后大家也可以直接面对面的和他们进行一个沟通，所以我觉得也是一个特别好的一个机会。Okay, without much ado, I will pass it to Mr. Nicholas. Hi.
Hello, thank you for asking me to join you this morning or this evening, depending, of course, where we are. I'll talk about UNIS in all sorts of ways for the next few minutes and then save at least 20 minutes at the end for questions. And I assume, Tina, you're going to be checking the chat and asking me the questions.
Yes.
Okay, good. And for those who joined early, you saw, as I did, a video about the school. Maccabees also has various pictures of the school, and we have even more on our website. You see my email address below my at the bottom of my screen here, jnichols, jnichols @unis.org, and you're welcome to write with any other questions you have at any point over the next few weeks or few months. I want to talk first about what sets UNIS apart. It is a unique school. It is the only school of the United Nations, and it was founded right after the Second World War, right after the United Nations itself started, for the simple reason that when the United Nations started and new families started moving to the UN from all over the world, some of them started complaining immediately about the comments and behavior their children were experiencing in other New York schools, private, public, or parochial. And some of those families threatened to move back home. And the UN knew that back in 1946, that it would have trouble replacing those families from the same countries because, of course, the families would talk. And also they knew that because so many countries were hesitating to pay their dues for the brand new United Nations, that they would therefore send out the word that the UN couldn't even keep its own staff. And so we started in 1946, early 1947, with the idea that without quotas, we would be, we hope, the world's most diverse school, and that has continued since we started. Currently, we have 123 countries. Our students speak 99 languages at home, and the faculty itself comes from 69 countries because the UN knew that it didn't want an all-American student body, and so therefore they did not want an all-American faculty. To this day, all the non-American faculty and staff members get G4 diplomatic visas as if they're ambassadors to the UN, and they can use the diplomat's lane at Kennedy Airport, for example. The UN provided the initial diversity, continues to do that, and attracts more. And in addition, they provide, which is sometimes news to people, stability, because unlike a lot of other international schools, we don't have a high turnover here. The average student at many international schools is at that school for 2 or 3 years, and then the family moves on often to another world financial capital. The average student at UNIS is, once again, without quotas, from a UN family, and most UN employees in New York are permanently in New York. So the average student at UNIS right now is here for 8.4 years, and we don't have that many openings in each grade. However, we are different from our peer schools in New York and having openings in every grade. Not a lot, but some. And I actually prefer that for admissions reasons, because it doesn't mean that our openings are only in the traditional kindergarten and ninth grade. Instead, we have them in every grade. And that means that no new student is the only new student in a grade each year, but there's not a lot of new students in each grade anyway. Going back to the founding, we've had connections with China from the very beginning, because as you probably know, China was the first country asked to sign the UN Charter. And we've always had students from Chinese mission, Chinese consulate families here. In addition, the mission and consulate have been very generous to us over the years. We have taught Mandarin at this school longer than any other school in New York. And students can take Mandarin on the fluent level all the way through school, and it's even offered after school in beginning and intermediate and advanced levels after school until the end of 8th grade. We are the school of the Secretary General specifically, because the Secretary General of the UN has sole authority over the school. He personally appoints the 18 members of the Board of Trustees, and the head of the board is at least an Undersecretary General. And all sorts of events are held up at the UN, culminating in graduation, which is always in the General Assembly Hall, led by the Secretary General himself, because once again, we're the UN school. As I said earlier, we don't have a quota for UN students, and sometimes we turn down UN applicants. The applicants have to go through the same process that everybody else does. I'll explain later what our application process is like. And the UN student numbers are usually between 50 and 60% each over the last 30 years. This year, UN students are 51% of our student body, so barely half. And of course, that means that the non-UN families of students are 49%. What we are not is an American school, and that's just based on the students who apply here and enroll here. Right now, only 8% of our students have both parents, if they do have two parents, who are American citizens and they speak only English at home. That's not 18 or 80%. We're not a majority US school. We never have been. Everybody here is actually a minority. And I think that leads to a very profound point that goes right back to the initial reason for the school. Because in other schools, students who are not in the majority are clearly in the minority. There's no majority here, so it's not an issue of minorities fitting into a common majority. I gave a UN ambassador a tour a year ago. He had just arrived in New York. And after about half an hour, he turned to me and he said, "I can't decide what sort of school this is," meaning he couldn't really tell whether we're an American school or a French school or a Chinese school or whatever, because the diversity is so intense here, unmatched by any other school on earth. In fact, I mentioned before that our teachers come from 69 countries. There are only 3 other schools on earth that have students from more countries than our teachers come from. So that's why once again, the diversity is just so strong here. And yet we never want students to lose their self-identity, their national identity. We want them to continue speaking, reading, and writing their home languages, their native languages, and our modern language department is very used to helping families do that. Another thing I wanted to talk a bit about is the IB program. The International Baccalaureate program is now at over 5,200 schools around the world. UNIS is one of the founding schools of it. In fact, UNIS says that it's the birthplace for the simple reason that the very first IB diploma graduates came from UNIS. So no other school has had IB graduates for as long as we have. All we teach in the last 2 years are IB courses, and that means that students take 6 courses, 3 on the higher level, 3 on the standard level. They fall under these categories: English, other languages, which I'll get back to, math, science, history, which of course is history of different regions and eras, but also here at UNIS, anthropology, economics, and philosophy. And then the arts, which in the high school are drama, filmmaking, music, and visual arts. Students can take 2 sciences or 2 languages besides English, in which case they don't take an arts class. They take each of those 6 classes for both 11th and 12th grades. And when they graduate, they get not only the UNIS diploma, but the IB diploma, and that can be the bilingual IB diploma, which means that they take their humanities classes in certain languages. The languages we teach are 8 in number besides English. And notice I'm not using the word foreign, because it's the one word we don't use at UNIS. Whenever someone says foreign, it means us versus them, and we don't have that here. The 8 languages are French, Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic, German, and Italian. Students start in kindergarten or pre-kindergarten here with French or Spanish, and they can also have Mandarin. And then in 6th grade, they add another of those languages and keep them going until either the beginning of 11th grade or graduation. So in other words, somebody who speaks Mandarin at home would be taking Mandarin at the fluent level here. And we don't have a language placement test or anything like that for admissions. Instead, we allow students to enter regardless of their knowledge of non-English languages. We're also unique in New York for accepting students up until about 9th grade who have no English, because after all, we are the school of the United Nations, and the UN has 6 official languages. English is only one of them. We would never want to say that it is important or mandatory for the UN's own school to make knowledge of English mandatory for admission. So we have some students entering every grade up until about 8th grade who have very little or no English. At the same time that they take their extra English classes, the rest of the grade is taking other languages, and the ELL, English language learner teachers, go in and out of the other classes to help out those students. As the grades go up, there are fewer and fewer students who enter with only their native languages or other non-English languages. And we are happy to hold interviews in any language that our student applicant speaks. And that's another benefit of having teachers from those 69 countries I mentioned. So if a student is applying to kindergarten or to 8th grade with limited or no English, that's fine with us. It doesn't enter into the admissions decision at all. In high school, it does, because by the end of 10th grade, students have to be fluent in reading, writing, and speaking English and at least one other language. Of course, that can be Mandarin, and if you have specific questions about that, I'd be glad to answer them later during this session. Another question that I know families occasionally have is there a program that we're really proud of? And what I'd say is the IB program, for one thing, because it does require real rigor more than I believe most other, if not all other, high school programs do. We don't have the IB before 11th grade, even though some IB schools do. They have what's called the PYP or the MYP. That's the primary year program or the middle year program. Those are for younger students. We don't, even though we go all the way back to the beginning of the IB, because we've always felt that our curriculum works better for preparing students for the IB in the last 2 years. And it's not that we don't know what the IB is, because we started it, but we just feel our own curriculum has more rigor. However, the IB does influence what we teach in the lower grades, and we know what the goal is. We know that at the end of 10th grade, every student has to be fluent in reading, writing, and speaking once again, in English and at least one other language. If students are here long enough, they're going to be learning certainly more than those two. This year, our average senior is fluent in 4.1 languages, which we think is unmatched by any school in the world. And the range this year is from 2 to 7 languages. Last year was 2 to 8 languages, by the way. But once again, a student's knowledge of languages doesn't enter into admissions. The curriculum, as I started to say, does lead to the IB. And later, if you have specific questions about the curriculum in the earlier grades, I can talk about that, but I can mention some things generally right now. We have students taking science, technology, math, English, the other languages I mentioned, all the way through the school every year. In addition, they have to take visual arts and music from pre-kindergarten until 8th grade. They also have to take drama from 3rd grade to 8th grade. And from 5th grade to 8th grade, each student has to play an instrument or sing in the chorus. We, in other words, want the students to learn how to play an instrument as a way of really getting to know music by producing it. Just as in science classes, we'd always insist that they do actual laboratory experiments. We don't want the music students to be listening to others producing music. Every student who picks an instrument has group lessons during the week and has to take an after-school lesson once a week. They can take those lessons elsewhere, but most take them at UNIS because it's more convenient. We'll offer students of any grade, but especially 5th through 8th grade, after-school music lessons. And this year, close to average, we're teaching 510 private music lessons each week after school. Another thing I wanted to say is about numbers. As you may know, we have about 1,570 students, but they are over 14 grades. So the grade sizes range from 70 in kindergarten to 125 in 6th grade, and then we stick with that number more or less for each grade right through to the end of senior year. This year's graduating class has 127. We feel that that number for each grade allows us to teach many, many different types of classes, all the languages I mentioned, all the arts classes and so forth and so on. But at the same time, with not that many students entering each grade each year, the principal should know every student by name, because we think the school would be too big if that wasn't possible. So that's why traditionally we've had that. And another thing I want to say is the building was designed for the number of students we have. We're just south of the United Nations on the East River. If you go to our website, unis.org, then go to admissions and then apply, you'll see a picture looking north from the school. You'll see the UN on the left side, showing how close we are to the UN. When the United Nations moved to Manhattan years and years ago, it wanted its school to be within walking distance, and it got the city of New York and 2 foundations, the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, to ask us 2 questions about a gift that are rarely asked, especially in a big city. How big do you want your property, and how big do you want your building? We're on thousands and thousands of wooden pilings over the East River. And in other words, this land was made for us, as large as we wanted it. And the building was designed by the same architects who did the UN and the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. We believe we have more square footage per student than any other school in New York, because once again, we were asked that question, how much property, how big is the building going to be? And so we have several gyms, we have lots of space in the building. You're all welcome to take an online tour. You can sign up for it on our website. Just go to our main page of the website, then admissions, and then tour. And you can sign up for tours. We hold them every single week, 3 times a week, from now until September. So we'd be glad to have you join us with that. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the travel program. In the 7th and 8th grades, all our students go outside the United States for the last 2 weeks of April. They live with the host family who have children the same age, and they attend a local school for 8 of the days they're there. We want them to use a language they've been studying every single day, every single hour. And they also have a day of community service and a day of sightseeing. But the main point is for them to be attending a local school. In the high school, because most of the students have already taken part in that program, we have optional programs, 2-week trips over spring break. We also help arrange exchanges and other trips during the summer. We have an office of student activities, is called, which oversees all that and gives advice to students and their parents about the various programs. As you can imagine, because we're affiliated with not only the UN, but specifically UNICEF, the child welfare part of the UN, we have connections in all 193 countries that are members of the UN just because of UNICEF. So it's very easy for us to find exchange programs, travel programs, and all that. We don't have a connection with another school, and that's because the UN wants this to be the only UN school here in New York. But certainly we welcome and encourage our students to take part in travel outside of New York, outside of the US, and see other parts of the world that they wouldn't know otherwise. Another reason why we teach more languages, we believe, than any other school on earth. And another thing I should stress about that is we require those languages for so many years that we're really aiming for the students to be fluent. That's the key part. And when your parents are, for the most part, at the UN and speak all those 99 languages at home, they know what fluency sounds like. We can't fake it. And that's why we have so many teachers in the whole school, specifically for languages. Our student-teacher ratio overall is 7-to-1. The smallest classes are definitely language classes. And in the junior school and middle school, the class sizes are generally 4 to 8 students with a single teacher. And the high school will run a language class with only 2 students. The range is usually in the high school from 2 to 6. We won't run a language class with only 1 student because we want the students to speak in that language with each other as part of learning the language. Another thing I want to talk about is a question that was posed to me. How can students make the most of their high school life and middle school life? I would say that being in a rigorous program is part of it, but also being in a program that meets their needs. And what I mean by that, for example, is in the language program here, we have for each language for each grade, 3 or 4 levels: beginner, intermediate, advanced, and fluent. Just as in the IB program, students, when they pick their 6 classes, are picking 3 at the higher level. They're more rigorous, they need a little bit more often, and 3 at the standard level. So we want the students to be picking things that they are going to be doing well in, but we still at the same time want to expose them to classes that they wouldn't necessarily know a lot about. In other words, the music program requiring students to play instruments or to sing and produce music that way. Another thing I think is really important for students to get the most out of high school life is to be involved. We do have a requirement that every student has to belong in the middle school and high school to at least one club. Clubs have to have at least 5 students and meet at least once every 2 weeks. Club sizes at UNIS range from 10 to 240. The largest club every single year is called Model UN in other schools, other places. For us, it's called UNIS UN because it's actually run by the Secretary General himself. And it always focuses on something of current UN business, something really crucial that year. It will surprise no one to hear that the topic of this year's conference, which unfortunately had to be online, was COVID-19's impact on the world. And they had speakers for a whole week from all over the world about fighting the COVID-19 virus in various parts of the world. And the Secretary General, as usual, started off and ran the whole thing. In a normal year, the ambassadors to the UN actually have to meet elsewhere during that week, and they meet, and then we meet in the General Assembly Hall, where, as I said before, the General Assembly, where the graduation is eventually held as well. Another thing I was going to answer is a question: what's it like to study at UNIS? Generally, in the high school, the assignments are the homework takes about 3 hours a night in the high school, 2 hours a night in the middle school, but we don't assign homework over the weekend. And long assignments like papers are assigned at least a week in advance. The longest assignment is the IB extended essay, because the culmination of the IB required of everybody is something called the extended essay. Everybody has to spend a year working on an individual project. They have to find something that no one else has done before, or that others have done but they haven't agreed on. In other words, each student has to think for him or herself. Each student gets a faculty mentor, and the students have to do original research. If they're writing on a historical topic, by the end of the project, they have to write 45 pages involving original sources. If they're doing a scientific topic, they have to do a year's worth of original lab work. And they're supervised every week by their advisor. So that's a member of the faculty who knows that area, and they meet individually. And that mentorship, or to use the old word tutorship, is the reason why we have our name Tutorial House for our high school, because every senior, even at the end of junior year, every junior meets with that faculty advisor weekly to go over how that individual research project is going. I don't know any other high school program anywhere that requires every senior to do an in-depth year-long research project like that. That's really a key part of the UNIS education. In fact, that's really what everything heads to. And then another thing I was going to say is we do have an extensive arts program here. You already heard about the classes, but we do have voluntary plays and musicals each year in the high school, the middle school, and the junior school. We have athletic teams starting in 7th grade. That is 7th grade beginning as a requirement of the leagues we take part in. As you can imagine, the most popular sport here by far is soccer or football. That's what you'd expect from 123 countries. Basketball is definitely number 2. And then in no particular order, the other teams we have are in tennis, track and field, cross country, volleyball, and baseball and softball. Every month, students do a different sport in the physical education classes. They do some of those team sports. They also do fitness, badminton, archery, do a number of things. So roughly they're doing a different sport every month, though swimming is 6 weeks each year instead of just 4 weeks. Students don't have to join an after-school activity, including a team, but we do have 3 sports seasons every year, trimesters through the year. And a lot of students join those, but everybody joins at least one club, as I mentioned before. Another question was, how does UNIS support Chinese students? I mentioned before that we've always had Chinese students here. We've always taught Mandarin. Students can enter from China with only Mandarin if they're young enough. We've always had Chinese students and teachers here as well. So we're used to students coming not only from the major cities, Shanghai and Beijing and others. I don't have to tell you what the names are, but we've had students over the years, I've searched this in our record bank, come from cities and even towns that are across the very big country. So we're used to not only students from Beijing, but students really from all the regions of China, because once again, we've always had so many students over the decades here from that country. Another thing I wanted to say before taking your questions was about how to get into UNIS. You'll see on our website, unis.org, and then admissions, that we have what we hope is a very straightforward application process. We have the steps laid out. There are 5 things that parents have to do. They create something called a Ravenna account, and then they submit the application into that. I should add, have always had our website translated into, I forget the number, but something like 140 languages of the world. If you go to our main page of unis.org and go to the very top, you'll see translate. And then every single thing is available in Mandarin and Cantonese, by the way, plus many, many other languages. If the parents want to write the parent statement and the rest of the application in Mandarin, that's fine with us. We can get that translated. And then the next thing is to schedule the interview. Long before COVID-19, we've always held interviews for applicants outside of New York online through Zoom. So we go back to something like 3 weeks after Zoom was created. So we know Zoom very well. We are the only school in New York that doesn't interview parents separately. It's nothing against parents, but we feel that to interview parents separately is to put the emphasis in the wrong place. We leave it up to the student about to be interviewed whether the parents join us. So we don't even have a rule about that. We want the student to decide what makes that student more comfortable, having the parents there or not. And as I said before, if the interview needs to be held in Mandarin or Cantonese or any other language, that's fine with us. We'll provide a translator. And many times the interview is given by one of our teachers who's a native speaker in one of those languages. The next thing is we require the ISEE or SSAT test, but we realize this year especially that sometimes that's very difficult. If a family finds it impossible to take either test, then we'll have the student take our own math test and submit a paper with ideally the teacher's comments and grade. That paper we hope will be in English, but if it can't be, that's fine too. So a student can submit a paper written for a class in Mandarin if necessary, and we'll get that translated. So those 2 things, the math test and the paper written for a class, would satisfy the test requirement if necessary. Though we hope that families will at least try to have their children take the one of those 2 tests. Next question is, what are we looking for in a student? We don't have a list. The world's most diverse school should not have a narrow list or even long list of types of students is looking for, because one of the striking things to me and my colleagues in admissions over many years has been how different it is when you look at how different countries have school reports, grading standards, grading scales, very different from Malaysia to Chile to Russia. And so one of the challenges and one of the great thrills of admissions here is using our own teachers at times to see how we can interpret the school reports, recommendations, test scores, and all that based on how a country looks at that. So we don't have a New York or a US bias when it comes to even interpreting school reports and all the other things. What we're expecting is a student knows that that student is applying to the United Nations own school. And so we'd assume that students want to be in a diverse place, the world's most diverse school once again, but we never expect them to show off their knowledge of the world capitals or to have information memorized about the United Nations or anything like that. We don't test them on their knowledge of diversity, in other words. The fact that they're applying here is enough for us. And we would never quiz the parents on why they wanted their children to go to UNIS. If they're applying to UNIS, we assume they know about the school. If they don't feel that they know enough about the school, then we hope that they will ask us lots of questions. We will never ask them lots of questions. So that, I think, helps answer the question of what are we looking for as a student and what are we not looking for in a student. We don't have a list. And then another question was, do students have to have a sports or artistic extracurricular activity? We don't look for that. We don't have a checklist, even though we have a really renowned soccer team, soccer teams, I should say. In my many years at this school, a soccer coach has never come to ask me about the applicants. We pick the students we think are right for the school, and year after year, our soccer teams do phenomenally well. So, so we're not looking for anything specific. We're looking for enthusiasm, but I say this as a former shy student. We never expect students to be extroverted versus introverted, whatever. We want the students during the interview to feel at ease. And that's the most important thing. Be themselves, talk about things that they're interested in. And that's really at the heart of our application process. Now, I've spoken for many minutes, and you all have been politely waiting to ask questions. What questions do you have?
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you need to take a water break.
I will. It's right here.
While we collecting, we already collected some questions, and starting from now, we're gonna ask questions one by one in order it was received. And I hear that UNIS is really I know more now about the UNIS, all the uniqueness and or the special programs that UNIS provide to the kids. It's really, they're providing them a world classroom to help them see the whole bigger world than any other schools. 好的，那么非常感谢我们的这样给我们介绍了一口气啊，我都没有来得及给他问问题，给他一口气全都介绍完了。那么下面呢是我们的 Q&A 环节，大家有什么问题？有一些家长已经在后台给我们发了问题了，然后呢我们就会一个一个来解答，然后大家有什么问题可以用中文也可以用英文，在那个 chat box 里面 type 给我。那么，第一个问题我们收到的是，so the first question we got is what aspects will UNIS consider most when reading a PYP student's application to MYP? It's very specific.
It is. And as I mentioned before, we don't have an MYP program, but we're very much influenced by the MYP and the PYP, and we get students applying from IB schools around the world constantly. So we know how to read those report cards. They're very much like the UNIS report cards. The most important part of those report cards are the teacher narratives. In other words, the paragraphs that teachers write about a student. Then we also look at the scores, at the grades, all those. But the most important thing is what the teachers write about them, because then we get a better sense than even the grades give us of how the student is doing in an individual class. So we're used to reading those report cards. We read them every day. And yet, as I said, students who are applying from other schools, those without the MYP or PYP program, are not at a disadvantage. We have students coming from every sort of school in the world. And that makes, as I mentioned before, admissions here so challenging and yet so much fun. We want to do it right. It just so happens we know the PYP and MYP report card extremely well. But also we know the report cards of every major school in every city of the world. I could probably pass a test on not only the best schools in Beijing and Shanghai, but also Santiago and Buenos Aires. I mean, it's just, we know how their report cards work. And if we ever had any questions about them, we would actually contact that school directly.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next question is, when apply for UNIS, what does the school think, how important is you think about community service, because we know that the school encourage the student to have the responsibility to care about our community. I guess the question is like starting from which grade, or you can talk about from your academic curriculum setting, design point of view, starting from which grade you start to like organize, have students to do community service.
Our grades go from pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, and in each grade, students have a community service requirement, because after all, we are connected to the world's largest community service organization. I found out yesterday that currently 500 million children around the world have been vaccinated by UNICEF. And that's long before COVID, by the way. That's for childhood illnesses like measles and all that. So we're certainly used to community service. Our community service shifts a bit as students get older. When they're younger, they're going to be doing things as a group. As they get older, there's going to be more and more individual work. So they do individual projects once they get to the high school. And because we're connected to every other part of the UN, we get a lot of advice from UN agencies on various ways to do community service. And every year, every grade together does community service for a day. For example, each high school grade for the last few years has gone to an underserved part of New York City and helped build houses. So we do that sort of thing as a group, in addition to the individual requirements for community service. The other thing I should say, though, is in case anyone was wondering, and the question hinted at this, we don't expect applicants to have done community service, because after all, it's not automatic that every school, every grade in every school around the world is going to have community service options. So it's not really fair to applicants for us to expect a certain amount of community service or to give extra points to those who've been doing community service. So all I can say is it doesn't matter for admissions purposes. However, if they come to UNIS, they will definitely be doing some community service both on their own and in a group.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. 刚才那个，我想加一句，就是我也刚刚才知道，从这样的回答里面，就全世界的儿童里面有一半的那个被接种疫苗的是由 UNICEF 提供的。So that's really great. So that's great. I just learned about that half of the child were vaccinated by UNICEF. So that's really great. Okay, so next question. So one is about the age. So I'll first say it in Chinese so that all the parents understand. This is a common question, I would say. And then I will say it in English. 那么下面这个问题是一个普遍的家长的一个问题。那我先用中文说一下。这个问题是，如果要进入 UNIS 的 Pre-K， 官网上的要求是入学当年12月31号达到4周岁。如果说家长想让小朋友晚1年入学，那么是不是还可以继续申请 Pre-K， 还是说只能申请 Kindergarten? Okay, this question is for entering to Pre-K. So on your website, it says that by the year that entering the school, the child needs to be 4 years old by December 31st.
That's right.
So if the family wants to hold the child back for 1 year, so when they apply, should they apply for pre-K or they have to apply for K?
They should apply for K, for kindergarten.
So UNIS doesn't allow for...
Not usually, unless there's a really good reason for it. I'm giving a general answer. We'd have to look at the specific situation. We have made an exception occasionally, but generally we want a student to stay with the student's age group.
Okay. 所以说，统一来就是说， 一般来说，他们是希望孩子是和所有的他们的同龄人在一起学习，那么也就是申请 K， 但是他们也是 case by case， 每一个孩子，他们了解到每一个孩子、每一个家庭的情况啊，以及想法都不一样，所以他们会每一个 case 都去具体分析，具体问题具体分析。那么第二个问题是关于推荐信，因为 COVID 很多小朋友的 daycare 是不能正常开班，那么申请 UNIS 的时候没有很好的 daycare 或者是之前 nursery school 的推荐信会不会对申请有影响？So the next question is because of COVID, many daycares are not open or it's not fully open. So by the time when they apply in the fall, their school might not have good recommendation, let all have good understanding, full understanding about the child. So would that be, so how does I guess the question is how does UNIS consider the recommendation at all the school report when children applying, like the little ones applying?
And during the strangest of all years, we've experienced that since September. So I know exactly what that parent was wondering about. We do our best, and if necessary, we will contact a school and talk to a teacher or talk to a principal. It actually hasn't been as bad as I originally expected. I think that teachers are still learning about their students, though not as well because it's online in many cases. But if we compare this year's school reports to last year's, even though there's some difference, there's not the huge difference I expected. And we haven't had to go to talk with other schools as often as I originally expected. But when we need to, we do that.
OK，这样说这个问题就是说是这一年他们经历过的，他们目前收到的那个 school report 里面，他们没有特别大的问题。他们的计划是说，如果说 school report 不是特别的清楚，或者他们有问题，他们会联系孩子现在的学校的校长或者是老师来得到更加具体的信息。但是目前来看，和往年来说没有特别大的差别。然后下一个问题是 ，so the next questions, how to determine whether you are in beginner, intermediate, advanced, or fluent in the other language course？这个问题是 ，I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Why don't you finish?
Yeah, OK， 我现在用中文说，就是说，是第二外语二外，因为 UNIS 一个非常大的这个家长，就是刚刚听到 UNIS 一个特别大的一个特点，就是他们提供很多门的二外，因为是和那个联合国的那个关联性。那么他就问，怎么去决定一个学生的二外水平是在初级、中级还是高级的这个水平 ？OK，go ahead.
Sure. We have placement tests for every student who has taken one of the languages that we teach in any other school, anywhere in the world. And those are online tests. They even involve a spoken part. Student speaks into the microphone and responds to some spoken questions. And our teachers are used to placing students at the right level, and they've done that for many, many years. So that is up to the teachers. It has nothing to do with admissions. As I said before, it doesn't enter into admissions what languages students speak, including English. And so placement is not part of admissions at all. It only comes into it when a student is enrolled, and then the student is going to be placed in a language class.
OK， 所以就是说，他们就是这个不是在申请的时候的一个考虑点，只是说在孩子申请那个课后的那个语言的项目的时候是一个那个考虑点。OK，next question is, so in your highest grade, means graduating grade, the 12th grade, how many students are there? What type of colleges do they usually go to?
I don't have this year's numbers yet, but it's been a very good college admission season, I've been hearing recently. I can tell you about last year's numbers. 61% of our seniors stayed in the United States. That's far greater than the American number of students, of course, as I referred to earlier. The United Kingdom is always second on the list. And then in no particular order, the other countries that are always on the list are Canada, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Japan. And then every year we'll see a few countries on the list we haven't seen for a while. Last year was Malaysia, one of them, because it was the son of the Malaysian ambassador to the UN, who is the son of a diplomat, had spent only 2 or 3 weeks every summer in Malaysia growing up. And he told me before he graduated that he really wanted to go into politics or diplomacy. So he knew he had to go back to Malaysia. So I don't think there's any college counseling office anywhere that is as used to universities around the world as ours. Just because if a student says, okay, I'm going to apply to these 4 countries, one of them the United States, that's standard for us. Our students in the US go to top places, there's no doubt about it. They go to a range. I tell you what I heard yesterday, 4 seniors. One is going to Trinity College Dublin in Ireland, the great Irish university. One is going to the College of William and Mary down in Virginia, the second oldest US college, where Thomas Jefferson and others went. Another's going to Cornell, and the other's going to Stanford. So that's, as of yesterday, that's a random group of 4 students.
Okay, great. I think I need to translate this because many parents would like to know this. OK， 那刚刚那个家长问的问题呢，是关于毕业班的，毕业班有多少个人一个年级，然后是什么样的走向。然后因为今年的这个大学生的那个结果，他们还没有统计出来，这样给出了去年的结果。去年是61%的学生留在了美国的那个大学，然后其他的第2大的去的那个学校呢，就是英国，然后还有其他的学校，像在加拿大，稍等，在Canada， 然后德国，然后荷兰，还有日本。然后每一年他们的学生的走向都是各个国家都有，因为他们本来就是学生来自各个国家。然后去年还有好几个去了马来西亚的，因为他们有个学生是马来西亚驻联合国大使的儿子，他说他想回去以后从政，所以呢他就回马来西亚上大学了。然后昨天有几个学生在那在跟这样聊到，他们说过了他们的那个想法。第一个有一个是想去爱尔兰的Trinity College， 在爱尔兰是非常好的一个大学，还有一个要去威廉和玛丽在 Virginia， 是美国第2老的那个文理学院。然后 Thomas Jefferson 呢，还有很多非常有名的那个美国的那个历史上非常有名的历史人物都是从威廉和玛丽毕业的。然后还有一个去康奈尔大学，然后还有一个是去斯坦福。这是昨天这样听到的。OK， OK, next question. Let me see. So about sports. The question is, you have very good sport team. So could you be more specific in what type of sports? And after 7th grade, what type of varsity teams do you have? And do they go to play different competitions during the weekends? In general, can you introduce it to us?
Yeah, the teams start in 7th grade, and they are soccer, basketball, tennis, track and field, cross country, volleyball, and baseball and softball. And then every student from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade each year has physical education classes. They'll do some of those. They'll also do fitness, archery, swimming, and they'll do roughly a different sport every month. So there is a difference between the after-school teams and the athletic classes, physical education classes during the school day.
Okay, thank you. 那么下面一个是 so the next question is about entry point. So if it's not big entry point, how do we know if we can apply? My kid is currently first grade, want to apply for second grade, and I'm going to translate this because I think our audience is from every grade. 所以，下面这个问题呢是说，如果是关于那个入学年的，如果说不是 K69这样的那个小升初、初升高，然后幼升小这样的入学点，是不是可以申请？比如说1年级的孩子能不能够申请2年级 ？Okay, go ahead.
We have some openings in every grade, but not a lot of them, and so everyone is encouraged to apply no matter what grade their children are going into. So in other words, we're expecting out of about 100 second graders to have about 10 of them new in September. And that's like most other grades all the way through. Kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade are largest entry points. We have 70 students new to the school in kindergarten, 25 in 6th grade, and about 20 in 9th grade out of 125 in the last 2 grades. So considering those are the second and third largest entry points, even those are not a lot of new students, but we do have new students in every other grade as well. As I was saying earlier, I think it makes for a friendlier school because not only are we used to students coming from every country you can think of, but also new students enter in some numbers every grade, every year, and yet we don't have a high turnover. It's getting all that to work together so we'd have the world's most diverse school without having to have a revolving door in front that really makes the school so wonderful when it comes to new students coming in.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last question is about, okay, I'm sorry, we just come another question. Okay, let me ask you, so 2 more questions. 最后2个问题. And so last question is that because of the international travel restriction, the parent want to know about visa issue, because as you know, right now, like Chinese citizens, they're really not able to get the visa, come to the UNIS. And so this is one, I guess is related. And another is that would UNIS consider spring enrollment? If by that time, everything's more clear and settled down.
Yeah, so I'll take that question first. We do allow immediate entry, though we don't have that many spaces each year. And this is set on our website. If you go to our main page for admissions, so unis.org, and then admissions, this is actually set out in one of the paragraphs. Students who apply for immediate entry during the current school year need to apply by the 15th of March, and if accepted, enrolled in attending classes by the 1st of April. So in other words, it's too late for the current year, but we had a few students entering during the school year if we had openings. That's the crucial thing there. The issue about COVID and visas and all that, first I want to say that we're one of the schools that can apply for I-20 visas, the F1 visa. And we have a few students who have those. Almost all the other students, though, have visas through their parents. This year, next year, if the visa problems continue and a family had paid the deposit, paid the first part of tuition, and then couldn't get into the United States, we would automatically refund anything they paid because it's not their fault that they haven't been able to get into the United States.
所以刚刚那个问题，我觉得就是可能对很多国际不在美国的家长有一个借鉴性，是问，如果说是问到那个学生签证的问题，以及是不是可以春季学期入学，这样的回答呢，说是因为联合国的这个国际学校，他们是有颁发学生签证资格的，他们可以给学生发 I-20，发学生 visa。如果说孩子因为被拒签而没有进到学校的话，他们是可以给学费退还。然后如果说家庭因为各种原因是需要，比如说春季学期入学，如果他们有位置的话，是可以接受的。然后还有一个问题，最后那么last question，那么最后一个问题是share a little bit more about UNIS academic philosophy. Do you follow a more exploratory learning style versus lecture? How much flexibility does a kid have in shaping his or her curriculum? How does the technology play a role in your curriculum?
Do you want to say that in Chinese first, or should I go ahead and answer?
Okay, I'll say that in Chinese first. Thank you. 就是这个是关于学校的那个学术方面的一个问题，就是你是不是就是问学校是exploratory learning，我觉得就是说让孩子自己去探索的这种学习的方式，还是说老师讲，然后老师在台上授课，然后孩子们有多少这个灵活性？因为每个孩子的学习learning style 学习的方式是不一样。然后最后呢，就是关于电子设备在那个学校的课程设置里面的一个 role。OK。
Well, the academic philosophy is not based for the most part on lectures. In some classes, there will be times when the teacher is going to give some information to the student in lecture form, I guess, but we're more of a discussion-based school. And certainly we want the students to learn how to express their own ideas. We want them to be challenged. We want them to have a rigorous program. But at the same time, we're expecting them to learn a certain amount of knowledge that's going to be passed down from the teacher as well. But we want them to think about that knowledge as well. So that sometimes I'm asked, are you a traditional or progressive school? Of course, that depends on how we define both of those, but we're probably somewhere in the middle. We want the students finally, when they leave here, to be independent thinkers, lifelong learners, and to be really aware of the whole world, fluent in various languages, but also aware of the complexity of the world and sometimes similarities between countries as well. The technology issue, I can say this about, as I mentioned before, we teach technology, require it every year. I should have added that in 9th and 10th grades, we don't offer it because everyone's taking in science classes only biology, chemistry, and physics. And the reason for that is we want every student, no matter what they take for their IB courses, to be equally prepared for no matter what they take. And technology then comes back in 11th and 12th grades. There are technology classes again. And if a student is really interested in technology, then that student is probably going to be devoting the extended essay, that individual research project I mentioned before, to a subject of technology. And then it's going to be doing something that's way in front of any possible high school course anywhere.
Thank you. So do you have a couple more minutes? We have one last question. Just
I'm not interviewing until 11 o'clock my time.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we just got one last question. Okay, so compared to other private schools in the city, some might say UNIS is not the most competitive in terms of academic, aka grades. Would you please tell us your view on this? 那这个问题呢，就是说，和曼哈顿其他的私校来说， 有说法是 UNIS 不是在学术上面不是特别的竞争激烈，那么家长想问一下这样的看法。然后这是我们的最后一个问题，然后大家如果有兴趣的话，可以回到我们的直播群里面再继续交流。OK.
Well, I don't comment on other schools in New York or elsewhere because I don't think it's fair to those schools for me to do that. I was previously at a boarding school in England, Eton College, which I'm sure some of you know, and then at a school in New York on the Upper West Side, a K through 12 school. You can see which one if you look at my biography on the website. But I would never comment on Eton or that other New York City school. If you ask for a list of the top schools in New York among 10 people, the 10 people are going to give you different lists because not everyone will agree on what the top schools or universities around the world are, or anything like that. We are a top school, there's no doubt about that. And I don't agree with the comment that we don't have grades that are as high as other schools because our IB program is really world renowned. So I'm not sure how I can answer that more fully. I do know all the other schools. 155 private schools in New York belong to something called ISAGNY, ISAAGNY, Independent Schools Admissions Association here in New York. And for several years now, I've been on the board of trustees of ISAGNY. So I know every other school in New York. And I can't comment on them, but I know that UNIS is certainly a major player in those schools across New York. So I just disagree with what I think the question is going after. Other questions?
Okay, I think that's all. Zhao, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to put our slides there? So if they have any more questions, they can scan the code to keep in touch. And thank you. Well, at the same time, while Zhao provide you the QR code to continue the discussion. And thank you, John, very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I really learned so much more about UNIS, and I truly appreciate and respect the global citizen that UNIS is like cultivating and educating our little ones.
Well, thank you.
好，那么我们非常感谢这样今天抽出这么宝贵的时间来和我们分享，这也是这样呢第一次在外部分享。刚刚我不知道最后大家有没有听这样之前的那个经历，都是非常所在的学校都是特别牛的，包括英国的伊顿公学以及上西的那个大家都知道那个学校，那么我就不说了。然后他现在呢选择在 UNIS， 我觉得而且 UNIS 最近来了一个新的校长，新的大校长，家长的评价都特别好。如果大家感兴趣的话，可以在我们我们照一会儿会分享的一个二维那个PPT 上面scan， 然后跟我们联系，我们继续这个讨论。So thank you so much, Zhao. You can put up the PowerPoint now. I cannot see it. 大家可以看到吗？ Yes, here it is. So you can scan it and continue get into contact with us to continue the conversation. If you're interested in applying to UNIS, any questions, feel free to reach out to us, to John, and we'll be happy to answer it. 所以大家如果对 UNIS 感兴趣的话，不管是明年春天，然后还是今年秋季的那个申请，都可以和我们以及和这样联系。Okay.
And my email address is under my picture here.
Yes. 然后这样的 email 也在他的那个他的那个 Zoom 上面，大家可以跟我们联系。好的 ，Thank you very much. 然后我再跟大家再预告一下，for the next 2 months, we're going to continue to have this School Talk Fridays series. 那么以后呢，我们每隔一周的周五都会有我们这个私校招生官的分享会。4月的第一周，4月9号是 Marymount。然后4月23号，然后第3个周五是 Pingree 新泽西第一的私校，欢迎大家继续收听，然后也欢迎大家把你们感兴趣的学校发给我们，我们去帮大家联系。随后我们还会联系各种不同的学校，像男校，然后因为今天UNIS 是混校。Marymount 是女校，然后那个 Pingree 是在新泽西的。随后我们还会请到寄宿初中、寄宿高中的学校来和我们对谈。好，谢谢大家。Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I'll stay on for a minute if I may.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, any last questions you want to ask? John will stay a little bit extra.
Thank you, John.
Glad to.
Have you visited UNIS, you guys, for those who are in New York? It's a really great location right by the East River. Walking, passing it.
Oh.
Yes.
I should look outside and see her.
Yeah, jogging, morning jogging.
Oh, that's it. Oh, she's the one right there. I see her.
Okay, so last one to ask about how to present yourself in the interview.
Be yourself. Don't feel that you have to act a certain way. Just be yourself.
做自己 and be confident. You are enough. Yeah.
I think what helps me answer a question like that is, as I was saying before, I was a very shy student. So I really understand what it's like to be nervous in an interview, to be shy and all that. And so I really try to get, as my colleagues do, try to get everybody at their ease. And if a student doesn't remember something or has to repeat something, that's fine. We've all gone through that. I see another few questions here too.
Oh, let me see. I'll translate. So this September, if they want to apply for pre-K, do you have in-person interview?
No, everything this year is online, including assessments for pre-kindergarten.
Okay, 没有所有的都是在 Zoom 上面。
Yeah, right now our pre-kindergarten in September is at capacity, but families are welcome to check with us between now and September to see if that continues to be true.
现在的那个他们的 Pre-K 已经满了，然后如果大家有兴趣的话，因为现在是9月份入学的家庭在陆陆续续交学费，然后签合同了，所以大家如果感兴趣的话，可以跟我们联系，看有没有位置出来。随后
But we do have some room in kindergarten right now, so it does vary by grade.
对，然后每个年级的那个空位的情况不一样，有的有少量的空位，也可以和我们联系。然后大家如果说想了解更多的申请的内容，然后我看到我们的工作人员小伙伴已经把那个 link 发在上面了，大家可以把问题发在上面，然后和我们联系。Oh, she said she's talking about it. Apply this September. Apply for next year, 2022.
Yeah, if a family's in New York, then we assume at this point everything will be back to being in person, tours and assessments.
During the fall.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But we'll continue doing what we've been doing for years and years. Anybody outside of New York can have an online interview or assessment, and we give online tours.
所以说，如果说是今年秋天申请，明年入学的话，那么他们是期待可以，就是说 in person，就是说到学校去，这样的话大家可以看看校园，然后去教室里面参观访校。但是呢，如果说家庭选择还是就是说出于各种原因，希望更加继续是在网上面试的话，他们也可以。Yeah. Okay. So, were you in spring break now at UNIS?
In a normal year, we have the last 2 weeks of March off, as other private schools do. This year, we're off for the first 2 weeks of April.
Oh, okay. So next week.
Exactly. Yeah, starting a week from today.
Okay, great. So have a great spring break. I'm sure it's a well-deserved break.
Well, I am looking forward to sleeping.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone. 谢谢大家，谢谢大家来参加。我们2个周五以后，4月9号再见。然后我们会请到全美排名第6的那个女校，基督教女校 Marymount 来和我们分享。谢谢John. Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
I'll stay on just for another minute, Tina, if it's all right.
Okay. Yes. I will be here. I'll be here too.
I can get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
I know. I have to say that this is really amazing, and to be, even though we cannot be in person, but we get to connect with everyone around the world.
Yeah, it is amazing. And then we've always felt that about Zoom, because we hold interviews. I should have mentioned this before, it's just extra, I suppose. We do hold interviews on weekends, evenings in New York, early mornings in New York, because of time zones around the world. So we're certainly used to the difference between New York and China, for example.
Yeah, now it's
12. Yeah, the 12 hours.
12 hours, yeah. So I know that some family from the West Coast told me that they cannot get up at 6 a.m. in California.
Yeah.
So they will look at our replays.
Yeah. And we'll give tours online at specific times if they work better for families. And I think specifically of Singapore, which I think is 14 hours ahead of New York. You know, that gets very tricky. Or is it Beijing is 12 hours. I think they're 14 hours ahead. Or 13 hours. What complicates it also is the difference with summertime.
Yeah.
As if things weren't complicated enough, and then summertime comes into it.
Yeah, we have a student coming from Singapore join UNIS.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of connections here with the Singapore mission, the Singapore consulate. Yeah, we know Singapore here very well. Others aren't leaving, so I'll just say thank you, and if you want to talk later, just let me know.
Sure.
And
we'll let you know too if.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me, and have a good weekend.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Take care. Bye.